Good evening. It's not that you overuse the intellect as a culture, but that you rely upon it to the exclusion of other faculties in your approach to life. Period. The intellect is brilliant, but on its own now, it is indeed in its way isolated both in time and in space in a way that other portions of the personality are not. When it is overly stressed with all of the usual frameworks or rationales that go along with it, it can indeed become frightened, paranoid, because it cannot really perceive events until they have already occurred. It does not know what will happen tomorrow, and since it is overly stressed, its paranoid tendencies can only fear the worst. Now, those tendencies are not natural to the intellect, but only appear when it is forced to operate in such an isolated fashion. Isolated not only in time and space, but psychologically isolated from other portions of the personality that are meant to bring it additional information that it does not possess and a kind of magical support. The so-called rational approach to life as it is practiced is a highly pessimistic one, carrying along with it its own methods and solutions to problems, its own means of achieving ends and satisfying desires. Many people are so steeped in that approach to life that they become psychologically blind to any other kind of orientation. Such is obviously not the case with you and Rupert, or you would not be having this session or any other such activity. The rational approach, of course, suits certain kinds of people better than others, even while it still carries its disadvantages. You have been living in an industrialized scientific society, so that the benefits and the great disadvantages of the rational approach appear everywhere in the social and political world. Artists of any kind find such an approach the least friendly, for it directly contradicts the vast thrust of man's creativity in several important areas. You, however, and Rupert do have evidence that hard-bed reality is quite different. In the past, you have both felt at some disadvantage yourselves, feeling our work to be theoretically fascinating, creatively valid, but not necessarily containing any statement about any kind of scientifically valid hard-bed reality. You did not think you were dealing with fiction. On the other hand, you are not willing to call it fact either. You are, in fact, dealing with a larger version of fact from which, as I have said before, the world of fact emerges. There have been numerous fascinating bits of evidence in your own lives, apart from these sessions, though certainly to some extent stimulated by the knowledge you gain in the sessions. They remain isolated bits, odds, and ends, in which case they begin to present you with a larger factual representation of reality. All of this material applies to your lives in general and to Rupert's condition, because you must clear in your minds as to your own status in that regard. And much of this material will clear the air and dissolve lingering doubts that cause both of you, but Rupert in particular, to hold on to the rational approach in a misguided effort to maintain what he thinks as a balanced viewpoint and open mind. It seems because of the definitions you have been taught that there is only one narrow kind of rationality, and that if you forsake the boundary of that narrow definition, then you become irrational, fanatic, mad, or whatever. The thin, cold rationality that is recognized as such is instead a fake veneer covering a far deeper spontaneous rationality. And it is the existence of that magical rationality that provides the basis for the intellect to begin with. The rationality that you accept is then but a small clue as to the spontaneous inner rationality that is a part of each natural person. Now, in one dream when you were asleep, when you were seemingly not rational, when your intellect was seemingly not operating, You perceived information about your past physical environment. You saw your old neighborhood, the Brenner's place, with animal and industrial waste all over the yard. Symbolically, you saw the situation in your own fashion, but you knew that the Brenner's property had been polluted. You still have a love of that area. You are in a certain correspondence with it. In a fashion, you keep your eye out for information regarding it. You are also somewhat idealizing the past, however, so you did not simply get the information straight on, but you received it in such a fashion that made its own psychological points also, and was furthermore wound into other action not only within that dream, but in a series of dreams. The dream made its point. Whether or not you read the article that later appeared in the Elmira paper, the dream made its point, in fact, whether or not you remembered it, though you did. You remembered it because you wanted to bring into your conscious range of instances of your own greater knowing. The portion of you that formed the dream knew of the pollution, but also knew of the award, the newspaper article, and your habit of reading the evening's paper. All of that involves a psychological motion of natural, magical import. It shows you that the rules of the rational world are filled with holes. It shows you that the rational world's views do not represent the bulwarks of safety, but are instead barriers to the full use of the intellect and of the intuitions. Rupert, having interpreted your dream, looked wide awake, but relaxed, through his studio into the kitchen. He thought of asking you to take a snapshot of the table with your camera, showing the partially open front door, so that later he could paint the scene. Your camera could not take in all of that, a fact he never thought of. Less than 2 minutes later, you came out into his studio with the camera that you had not used for months. Rupert had also been thinking newly about the magical approach from ideas in your notes that he had just read. You came out as if in answer, as if to say, yes, the magical approach does indeed operate, and this is how. Rupert's state of mind was in correspondence with your own state of mind, even as you are in some kind of correspondence with your old environment. So in these cases, you have a free flow of information at other levels. Now, when you understand that intellectually, then the intellect can take it for granted that its own information is not all the information you possess. It can realize that its own knowledge represents the tip of the iceberg. As you apply that realization to your life, you begin to realize furthermore that in practical terms, you are indeed supported by a greater body of knowledge than you consciously realize, and by the magical, spontaneous fountain of action that forms your existence. The intellect can then realize that it does not have to go it all alone. Everything does not have to be reasoned out, even to be understood. This marks the end of Seth Speaks, the magical approach. This is session 2, an hour, part 1. Let's talk about it. So in this passage, Seth explains that while the intellect is powerful, it is limited when it operates in isolation. When overly stressed, the intellect can become fearful and paranoid because it struggles to predict the future. This happens because it lacks access to the broader, more spontaneous sources of knowledge available within the personality. Seth argues that our culture's over-reliance on rationality leads to a pessimistic worldview, which blinds us to the magical, or, in other words, intuitive aspects of reality that offer deeper understanding and offer deeper support. He suggests that by acknowledging the limits of the intellect and embracing a more holistic approach to life, we can tap into a richer and more accurate perception of reality. If you've enjoyed this reading, please consider giving it a like, sharing with a friend, and of course, subscribing for more. And of course, Do not forget to hit the notification bell so you won't miss any videos in the magical approach or in the nature of personal reality, which we are reading simultaneously. What did you think about this particular passage? Please leave it in the comments below. And as always, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I am Tony Victory, a wolf uncaged. Thank you.